Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto this week, prohibitionists drop $1.5 million into Massachusetts to shut down the billion-dollar adult use market in the Bay State. When and how will the industry respond? We talk with one of the nation's most respected pro-cannabis journalists who calls himself Reggie Reefer.
It also proved to us that, legalizing cannabis nationally won't destroy the fabric of society, right?
Plus, a new poll of Massachusetts residents who did sign that repeal ballot question initiative said they felt deceived by the process and would never have signed it if it was explained to them. And all quiet on the rescheduling front in Washington, D.C., but the Senate sends President Trump a bill that would continue to protect state medicinal markets. Maine is another New England state that is facing a shutdown ballot initiative, and this week, that state's Secretary of State says questionable signature gathering efforts are okay if they lie and misrepresent what they're doing. How is this possible? And it looks like adult use sales in Virginia could begin in that state by November of this year as the Senate continues working on a bill to present to new Governor Abigail Spanberger. She is ready to sign it when she gets it, which would make Virginia the 25th state to legalize adult use. Plus, Nebraska lawmakers are looking to overhaul that state's fledgling medical cannabis program before it even begins. We talk with Nebraskans for medical marijuana founder Crista Eggers, who's not too happy again with her governor.
And the governor is against this issue. He is supportive of medical cannabis, but definitely not supportive of medical cannabis as passed by the people.
All that and more on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM-TV's weekly roundup of news on the battle to end cannabis prohibition. I'm Alaina Pinto. All is quiet on the federal reform front in Washington, D.C. The only thing making news in the nation's capital this week is a Senate bill to keep the federal government from disrupting the existing legal medical markets in states. So we turn to the states where there is some movement, and it looks like Virginia might now be the odds-on favorite to become the 25th legal adult use state in the United States, perhaps as soon as November of this year. Joe Parsons has been documenting that fight for a while now. Here's Joe.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Virginia's high-profile and historic gubernatorial election is complete as Abigail Spanberger was sworn in as Virginia's first lady governor. She's already expressed a willingness to move forward with adult retail use, as long as it adheres to strict and safe guidelines that include clear and responsible product labeling. And just as her administration has begun, Delegate Paul Kryzak has finalized and filed a completed and new cannabis bill to be sent to the House of Representatives. The new bill is in line to the revision that was released to the public last month at the last Joint Commission to oversee the transition of the Commonwealth into a retail market, in which he also chaired. There's already a steady showing of bipartisan support for many of the revisions to this year's bill, so hopefully it'll pass as quickly as last year's did. The new bill has been the hard work of many lawmakers who believe in the revenue potential and giving responsible adult use consumers a choice, and hopefully to reduce the dangerous legacy market's presence in the Commonwealth. And lastly, speaking of hardworking cannabis lawmakers, this year, the annual Virginia Normal Benefits and Awards Conference called the Commonwealth Green Gala in Richmond is honoring Senator Adam Ebbin. Senator Ebbin has been a driving force working since 2020 to get the legal framework for both medical and recreational cannabis use in the Commonwealth. He's also worked with fellow lawmakers like Paul Kryzak and Aaron Rouse, and even independent groups like Marijuana Justice to get safe and fair legislation passed. If not for his hard work and devotion, Virginia would not have been the very first Southern state to get wise and re-legalize. He deserves the honors. Well, that's going to do it for this week from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, Sponsored by 97.5 3WV in Charlottesville and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Until next time, I'm Joe Parsons. Stay lifted.
The current 40-plus states with medical programs and 24 legal adult use states in the U.S. didn't happen overnight. 13 of those states used a citizen-led effort to get voters to make changes to their state's cannabis laws at the ballot box. And now the prohibitionist group SAM, or Smart Approaches to Marijuana, are attempting to use that same tactic to undo existing adult use markets with a ballot initiative. Here in the Bay State of Massachusetts, the Office of Campaign and Political Finance Filings reported this week that SAM is going to drop $1.5 million in their campaign to shut down the adult use business in the Bay State. Curtis Emery has more in his Bay State Cannabis Report.
I'm Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, a development in the ongoing situation here in the state where a prohibitionist group has gotten a ballot question on this year's electoral cycle, which hopes to overturn adult use sales here in the state. That group had been taken in front of a state body, governing body here last week, and under suspicion of fraudulent signature gathering, the state had decided that no fraudulent activities could be proven. However, in a recent poll organized by the Committee to Protect Cannabis Regulations, it was discovered that about half of the signees who signed these petitions to overturn adult use sales felt misled or lied to or regret signing these, furthering the suspicions that foul play was indeed at hand, or at least those who signed weren't given the correct information or the whole picture just to what they were signing. Also in the news, the CCC decided this week that it's going to take firmer action in dealing with bodies here in the state under receivership. Because the cannabis industry is not federally legal, they cannot declare bankruptcy. Instead, the state has a specific program in place, receivership, where the state intervenes and helps get companies out of rocky areas. The state, or the CCC, decided that within the next 30 days, they're going to come back with a more rigid and functional set of guidelines for companies in receivership, hoping to help bring Massachusetts cannabis up out of uncertain financial times and back into a nice, strong market. I've been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report, Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Using the ballot box is one of the most effective ways to make changes to laws in states. In the state of Maine, the same thing is happening. Both Maine and Massachusetts have received complaints about the professional signature gatherers' tactics to collect those signatures. Some say it's fraud, and others have witnessed intimidation and lies. This week, the Secretary of State in Maine, Shenna Bellows, said it's okay if those groups who are being paid by prohibitionists to gather those signatures lie about what the question is all about. She says they are protected by the First Amendment. Her exact words are, quote, "You have a right to lie under the First Amendment. So I do not have authority to take any enforcement action over the truth of what is being said," unquote. Cannabis Coast to Coast News executive producer Jimmy Young talked with a columnist for Cannabis.net this week about how 2026 is shaping up to be a battleground for the cannabis plant in America.
Thanks, Alaina. We are joined by a very special guest on Cannabis Coast to Coast News this week. His name is Reggie Reefer. Now, I watched and listened to this guy for a long time because I read Cannabis.net, and Kurt Dalton, who's the founder of that and kind of is the grand poobah of Cannabis.net, was my co-host on a podcast we did back in 2019, okay? And this gentleman is a writer, and he wrote an article this week that I was so excited about. I reached out to my friend Kurt. He introduced me to Reggie. I can call you Reggie.
Yeah, 100%.
Reggie Reefer, okay? And the article he wrote was 2026, the year of the great cannabis battles. So, Reggie, first of all, you did a great job. You touched on so many perfect points about the state of the industry right now, as far as I'm concerned. So I congratulate you on that. But if you could look at this, and it says, shaping up to be the battleground for the cannabis plant in America. How did you come up with this idea? And my goodness, it's quite a long piece too. How many words, if you don't
I don't
mind?
know. It's like close to 2,000, maybe
1,000
around
words.
about there.
Wow.
Usually they are around about there. I try to keep them short, but it
Oh
just
no.
they
You're
get
talking to a talk show host who knows how to fill time and
yeah,
is reprimanded for talking too much.
yeah,
So I get it.
yeah. That
Uh,
happens.
but congratulations. I think the biggest thing that I took away from this article was it really is a great example of how discombobulated the industry is right now because you've
Yeah,
got the legacy market that's been around for over 100 years. You've got the hemp CBD market that was deemed federally legal by our Congress of the United States back with the Farm Bill in 2018, where they opened up Pandora's box and they created this cottage industry that's underregulated, unregulated. And then, of course, now you have the people who are trying to do it the right way, the legal licensed group. And unfortunately, they're fighting against each other.
yeah,
There really has to be one plant. And I'm sure you know who Steve D'Angelo is, and
yeah,
I'm sure you know
100%.
who Andrew is, and you know that they're starting the One Plant Alliance, which I
Yeah.
think is tremendous. So, what do you think is the biggest reason right now for this discombobulation in the industry?
Well, as you mentioned, factions were created, and there was no national cohesiveness throughout all of the different, factions. So
Right.
you got the states, markets, they don't care about the other states as much unless it's a legalized state next to a non-legalized state, because that creates kind of like a minor, black market, gray market area. Makes it a little bit hard.
Hmm.
Then you've got the hemp dudes. They obviously was like, wow, we just scored the big one, so let's start selling this, psychoactive stuff. And to be fair, I smoked all of that, and it's not as psychoactive as just pure straight up flower. But it also proved to us that, legalizing cannabis nationally won't destroy the fabric of society, right? So that was on the other side that you could see, like, okay, you know what, they sold this at gas stations, and we didn't have people go crazy.
Right.
um
But we did get it into the hands of kids because of the stupidity of our Congress that didn't
yes,
put an age gate on it, because
yes,
that's the simplest thing to have controlled that. And also, let's also mention the fact that the FDA, after that farm bill, was supposed to be the regulatory body about how to
yes.
take CBD and put it into different products, and they did nothing
And
about
that's the problem, right? The problem here is we're treating cannabis and hemp as two separate things.
it.
So
Right.
that's where I see the one plant philosophy coming, and hey, it's not two things; it's the same plant. And under this banner, we should make rules for this whole plant. Um, and then also, really establish the fact that the whole Controlled Substance Act needs to be renegotiated. That thing is just it's one of the worst policies that has ever been birthed in the history of the United States.
That entire interview will be available on demand right now at the WPCM-TV.com website and released on our YouTube channel on Thursday. Another state that is battling over signature gathering is in Florida, where the Smart and Safe Florida group continues to gather signatures to get the adult use question back on the ballot for the fall. It's an uphill fight in the Sunshine State because their governor, Ron DeSantis, really doesn't want to open up cannabis sales to adults and keep his state focused on just their medical program, which is the most successful in the nation. A report on the latest data from the Florida Division of Elections shares that the Smart and Safe Florida group has submitted 714,888 signatures with a goal of 880,000 submitted by February 1st, which is just 6 days away. That group still needs over 60% of the votes to make changes to the state constitution in Florida if those signatures can be collected in time. Next up, let's check in with Tina Tasaka with our Southwest Cannabis Report.
I'm Tina Tasaka on location with Iconic Representation and Cannabis X America, and this is the Southwest Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Former NBA star Lamar Odom was arrested for DUI in Las Vegas after police clocked him driving 106 miles per hour. Officers reported an overwhelming odor of marijuana, and Odom admitted he had smoked weed earlier that day. He failed field sobriety tests after swaying, losing balance, starting too soon, missing nose touch tests, and stopping mid-test. He was charged with DUI plus traffic violations for 41 plus miles per hour over the limit and improper lane use. Prime Leaf's Flower Hour with Tucson Doobie members is a members-only, just held its intimate cannabis tasting on January 22nd at Moroso Medical Center, featuring VARS Cannabis. Members get early access to new strains, insights from growers, curated tastings, munchies from Chiba Hut, and community connection. For this free for members, so check out Tucson Doobie. It's a new year and a brand new event. Come one, come all. The Marijuana Industry Trade Association, META, is hosting a special industry gathering you won't want to miss. It's Wednesday, January 28th from 6 to 9 p.m., and the location is Wasted Grain in Scottsdale, Arizona. Tickets are available online at meta.us/events. That's it for the Southwest highlights. I'm Tina Tasaka with Iconic Representation and Cannabis Ex America for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There's another southern state that is starting to debate cannabis reform again. Surrounded by decriminalization states like Kentucky, Virginia, Missouri, and Arkansas is the volunteer state of Tennessee. A bipartisan group of legislators in that state house is talking about how, when, or why they should consider decriminalizing cannabis. This would be for a medical program that would drive tax revenue. 8-term state representative Antonio Parkinson, a former Marine and a Democrat, is pushing the Freedom to Farm Act in his state. There is a long way to go, but many state representatives from both political parties are giving credit to President Trump's executive order to remove cannabis from Schedule 1 of the CSA. Parkinson's bill would allow 15 plants to be grown at home. Anyone who knows anything about this complicated plant knows that could turn into quite a harvest if it is grown outdoor versus indoor. In fact, there are dozens of factors that impact the amount of cannabis that can be harvested from one plant, let alone 15 per adult per dwelling. Parkinson explains his thought process that he respects personal use and home grow, but his bill shows a complete misunderstanding of this complicated plant medicine. He emphasized that the plants could not be sold or removed from the property, and quote, "It is not to be sold, it is not to be bartered, it is not to be taken off the property. If it's taken off that property or if you're caught selling it, then you will be subject to all of the existing criminal marijuana laws. I don't want to know, and the government does not need to know." Unquote. Needless to say, there will probably be quite a few amendments to this bill if passed into law. It still does reflect how the president's executive order is already impacting the thought process of our elected officials. The next question is, what impact has it had on delaying the federal hemp ban? That's why we are fortunate to have Kerry Hinkle as our hemp reporter. Here's Kerry.
I'm Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and I am back with another hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week we have a lot of news to cover as it relates to all things hemp policy in DC. First off, we started the week finding out that the continuing resolution that will be coming out by the end of the month to keep the government open will not include the extension from Congressman Jim Baird and Angie Craig. There was a lot of behind-the-scenes negotiations. We've heard reports of our biggest opponents willing to blow up the entire deal of funding the government over this inclusion of the extension in this very large funding package. So now the industry looks for other large spending packages that could move, or agriculture bills that could come together to support farming partners. There are going to be other vehicles to attach this extension language to, hopefully before the November 13th ban date kicks in. And then we also just got massive news today as Congressman Morgan Griffith, and he has been joined with a Texas counterpart, Democrat Mark Vesey, have finally released their long-awaited regulatory bill that would solve some of the much-needed issues around issues on 21 and up to sell the hemp products to adults only, labeling, registration, testing requirements. It's a 75-page bill almost, I think. So it's really well thought out, in depth, and yet it still is not the final answer. Currently, there is a 5 milligrams of THC per serving and 30 milligrams of THC per package. Those limits would default after 3 years if the FDA does not come up with their own limits. We understand, in speaking to the Congressman's office, that this is a starting point. It's a messaging bill. It's so that the extension can be heard in conjunction with regulatory solutions. But again, it is largely what the industry has been asking for, and I think a much needed step in the right direction. So now the industry, with both bills finally out, with co-sponsors on congress.gov, can point any and all of their members, both on the Senate and House, to direct them directly to staffers in these offices and garner support for these large, much needed pieces of legislation. So bad news on the extension, good news on the regulatory front, and all things move forward with hemp as always. Again, I'm Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp. We'll see you again next week.
That'll do it for the A Block this week, but when we come back, we'll have more state reports for you, and we will check in on Nebraska, where despite over 70% of voters supporting medical reform, that legislator continues to change the rules to fit their own agenda. We talk with Crista Eggers from Nebraskans for medical marijuana when Cannabis Coast to Coast continues after this.
Cannabis as passed by the people. Our ballot language is very clear. It was the whole plant.
Your cannabis business could be overpaying by hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal income taxes because of one simple assumption that you're making about your accountant. A dispensary owner in Colorado called me frustrated as hell. He'd been working with the same accountant for 3 years. His accountant said, "What's 471C?" Here's what the ignorance of that accountant was costing this business owner: $180,000 every single year for 3 years. 471C has been around since 2017. We're talking about an 8-year-old tax provision that many cannabis CPAs don't fully understand. 471C is one of the most complex and highly debated tax strategies in the cannabis industry. If you want to make sure you're not leaving any money on the table, I'm offering free 471C reviews this month. Link in the description.
Accounting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
If you want to make history, if you want to be part of history, if you want to say you helped legalize marijuana in America, now is the time to join us.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the B Block, or second section of our weekly news program that documents the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto. Over the past few years, we have started to share coverage of the cannabis reform movement around the world, and now not just here in the U.S. More and more countries are looking at their existing cannabis laws and adapting to the changes in public perception, as well as the science and research that is finally getting the respect from governments. So we will be expanding our coverage internationally now, and our UK correspondent Dave Barton will start to expand his own coverage for us beyond Great Britain and into the entire European continent. Here's Dave.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermador with your international cannabis report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Europe's cannabis landscape continues to shift, with regulatory hurdles and strategic pivots shaping the year ahead. France's long-anticipated move towards national medical cannabis prescriptions has once again been pushed back, with insiders now suggesting that a fully operational market won't emerge until 2027, tempering optimism among operators who had counted on France as a key European growth market. Meanwhile, at EU level, the European Union Drugs Agency, the EUDA, has launched a new policy initiative called Cannapol, a continent-wide toolkit designed to support member states developing adult-use cannabis legislation. Although the project is still in its early data-gathering phase, proponents say it could help harmonize approaches to regulated markets, cultivation, and retail frameworks across Europe. In Spain, new official medical cannabis guidance has confirmed that raw cannabis flower won't be permitted in the National Medical Program, limiting patient access to pharmaceutically standardized preparations dispensed through hospital systems, a move that has sparked pushback from advocates concerned about overly restrictive access. The German market remains Europe's heartbeat, with cannabis commerce and community infrastructure continuing to expand. High Times reports that Germany's legal ecosystem, from social clubs to seed and clone networks, is now a central focal point ahead of the International Cannabis Business Conference, ICBC, in Berlin later this year. Elsewhere, industry investment dynamics are shifting as established players like Medios announce new partnerships to enter the European medical cannabis market, signaling that multinational capital still sees long-term value in regulated cannabis despite short-term regulatory friction. And in Britain, a new initiative was launched giving patients a direct voice in how the UK's medical cannabis market is shaped. Patient Panel is a new medical cannabis market research consultancy that aims to put patients front and center of the UK sector and its future development. The company has just announced its first partnership with Canadian licensed producer Rubicon Organics and British medical cannabis patient advocacy service Patient Cans UK. And guess who's behind Patient Panel? Me, of course. Find out more at patientpanel.uk. That's all for this week. I'm Dave Barton from Thermidor, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debi Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. So what we have in Canada this week is that Canada, the CBSA, it has seized over 1,400 kilograms of cannabis in the month alone of January 2026. This has been a seizure that was seized within the Main port and the Montreal port, as well as 1,100 kilograms that was seized from the airport within Toronto going to Germany. With the CBSA finding this seizure, not only is this something that has been a dump on the cannabis industry when it comes to the illicit market, especially starting out with 2026, but it's showing that the illicit market isn't necessarily creating smart choices when it comes to the way that they are trafficking the cannabis. So in a way, it's bittersweet, but I'm happy enough to know that this is something that we are getting a handle on. When it comes to the rest of Canada, the trafficking that they had stated that was happening in Nova Scotia with the cannabis illicit market isn't and has not been It has been denied by the police that there is any sort of link when it comes to both of the industries coming together or any sort of mischief around that, which I guess is an okay thing, but it's still a little bit confusing. When it comes to Canada, this is Debi Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast News Report. Peace.
Back here in the United States, the state of Texas is finalizing its new hemp regulations. That state had been operating under emergency rules passed by the state's legislature that exposed a very public divide between their governor, Greg Abbott, and their lieutenant governor, Dan Patrick. This week, the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission approved the final regulations for sales of hemp-derived products. The biggest one is that they are finally putting an age gate in place, restricting sales to adults over 21. Of course, they still have to regulate smoke shops, gas stations, and convenience stores where many of these products have been available since the Farm Bill of 2018 created this mess in the first place. The Texas Department of State Health Services announced last month that they were increasing the fees for hemp licenses by 13,000%. That's right, from $250 per license to $25,000 for manufacturing. If you think Texas is the only state that is trying to reel in the emerging unregulated hemp industry, you should also look at what has been going on in the state of Nebraska. In the last election, citizens passed a medical decriminalization bill at the ballot box with 72% support. Crista Eggers is the driving force of that movement in Nebraska, and now her fight with state politicians continues to heat up. This week, executive producer Jimmy Young talked with Crista in this exclusive interview.
Let's take it right from the top. You told me before we started recording that the bill dropped on Wednesday. What was your immediate reaction? And then after 24, 48 hours, where are you now?
Yeah, so well, thanks for having me on, Jimmy. Love to always have a chance to talk about Nebraska. Obviously, there's red tape and hurdles in any state. Nebraska is very unique that we are seeing an opposition that I think is unmatched to anything that has been seen, at least at the implementation part of a medical program. And so this last week, what happened was there was a bill introduced at request of the governor, and the governor is against this issue. He is supportive of medical cannabis, but definitely not supportive of medical cannabis as passed by the people. Our ballot language was very clear. It was the whole plant. It was a comprehensive program. It allowed for out-of-state physicians to recommend and gave possession rights to patients with a written recommendation. Now, what we did expect to happen was for the legislature to come in, create some framework, rules and regulations to get this program started. And while we are supportive of that, this bill essentially has 75% is very good. It's things that have to happen to create a good, safe, regulated industry. It gives a lot to the industry so they can get started. It creates a registry, which is good and bad. But essentially this bill, there's about 5 parts that very sneakily, I don't know if that's a word, but it was done in a way that really, I think, is going to fool some people that this is a great bill and this is a cleanup bill. And essentially what it does is it goes in and it strikes the voter pass statute to narrow it down. The most concerning thing of all is it gives all authority to all the phases of implementation, the industry, all license types, but then it gives them the authority over patients. And we were very clear in our ballot language that one petition was patient possession rights and the other was the regulatory framework. We do not want for this Medical Cannabis Commission that is defying what voters passed. They are following orders from the governor, attorney general. We do not want them to have power over the patients in this capacity. And so that is what this bill does. It gives all authority, including the patient side, to this commission. And, the indirect threat there is the rules and regulations this commission has moved forward with that are not quite in law, but getting ready to be, restricts flower, vaporization, edibles. It only allows for recommendations from a very small group of registered doctors in a program that isn't even started. It puts a THC cap. It was not part of the ballot language. And so this bill is not good for patients. It does not do anything for patients.
Right. And that's obviously the whole purpose of a medical program. And these are the same villains in your life, your governor, your attorney general, that have been fighting the results of what the citizens wanted since day one. Do you have any friends in the legislature? Does anybody support what you're doing?
Absolutely. We have a lot of support. We're a unicameral, so that means our legislature is made up of no Democrats, no Republicans. Everybody is nonpartisan. That sounds great. If it functioned that way, that's not how it functions. So we are outnumbered. The Democratic senators or Democratic leaning senators are very much in support and are there to stand up for the will of the people, which this clearly defies.
And
but we do have a lot of Republican friends.
And for patient rights.
And for patient rights, absolutely. They have championed this issue for years and years and years, and we have a lot of Republican support as well.
A full interview is available on demand on the WPCM-TV.com website. Next up, let's check in with Jenny Germano in Colorado, where that state launched something new. It's the first cannabis pharmacy with a medical-grade CBD product. Here's Jenny.
I am Jenny Germano with ICS Consulting. This is the Colorado report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A medical first has landed right here in Colorado with the launch of a new type of pharmacy that aims to change how CBD is prescribed and used. Colorado is now home to the nation's first licensed compounding pharmacy dedicated to dispensing THC-free, prescriptive-only CBD. The facility, called Casmira Pharmacy, officially opened this week after gaining approval as a 503A compounding pharmacy, a credential that allows it to formulate customized medicines for patients under a doctor's direction. The key difference with this new pharmacy, there's absolutely no THC, the substance in cannabis that's responsible for intoxication. Instead, Casmira Pharmacy focuses on ultra-pure cannabidiol, which is compounded to meet individualized patient needs rather than sold off the shelf like typical CBD products. Co-founders say the goal is to shift CBD from the wellness aisle into the realm of serious, personalized medicine. Providers can now work directly with patients to tailor CBD treatments for a range of health concerns, including chronic pain, without the risk of psychoactive effects or interference with drug testing. The pharmacy is also Legit Script certified, a healthcare compliance standard that underscores its commitment and safety, transparency, and quality, essential elements for clinicians considering CBD as part of a treatment plan. While Casmira Pharmacy is launching first in Colorado, the company says it plans to pursue licenses in additional states this year, potentially bringing this prescription-based CBD model to patients beyond the Rocky Mountain region. A significant step for cannabinoid medicine in Colorado and a big shift from how CBD has been traditionally marketed. I am Jenny Germano with ICS Consulting, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One state that has created a vibrant cannabis market is the state of Missouri. Brandon Jones has been part of our news team for years, and now he returns after a proposal was released to drastically change the existing rules for both medical and adult use markets in the Show Me state. We welcome back Brandon Jones to the Cannabis Coast to Coast news team.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones with B Green Distribution with the Missouri Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. And yes, thanks Alaina. I'm excited to be back with the Pro Cannabis team and here excited to tell you all about what's going on in the state of Missouri. So like we talked about, yes, there is some new law reform that's getting put into place there. It's not going to be voted on until November, but what the biggest things about it are, first of all, that now there will not be any limits on your amount of purchase of cannabis in the state of Missouri, whether you're a recreational patient or a medical patient. You'll also be allowed to grow at home. So right now you have to go through a special cultivation license and there's a cap. So they're talking about home growers being able to grow without having to go in and testify and put in any of sort of legal documents to make themselves be a legal home grower. Also, workplaces will not be able to have so much strict regulations on the use of cannabis when people are not at work. So those are big things that should be on the ballot here in November in the state of Missouri. Another huge thing that's happened since I've gone is we've reached $1 billion in sales. That's right. The $1 billion mark has been passed in the state of Missouri, which has reached and also led to $100 million in taxes given back to the state. Over $40 million given to veterans, and a lot of money is given back to substance abuse programs here in the state of Missouri as well, too. So another thing that is on the ballot is tax reform. They are doing some things here that people aren't very happy with, where they are double stacking taxes, where the state and the county are all trying to take taxes when you make one single purchase. That's another thing on the ballot. But again, I'm Brandon Jones with B Green Distribution. Very excited to be back to give you the news here in the state of Missouri.
Out west in Washington state, lawmakers there are tightening up the rules regarding private testing labs. A House bill was passed this week clarifying the rules that the Agriculture Department and the Liquor and Cannabis Board have been operating under for years. The bill gives the final approval for labs to the Department of Agriculture, removing any power from the Liquor Commission and naming that department as the sole approver of all licensees for cannabis in that state. One more item from Washington state that might have cleared the way for home grow. Companion bills were filed in both the Senate and the House to allow for home cultivation. It's hard to believe that one of the first states in the nation to decriminalize cannabis never allowed home grow. Another example of more reform progress in cannabis.
Hi, I'm Matthew Friedlander with Skagit Organics, coming to you with the Washington State Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast. So today I've got news about our state legislative session and 2 upcoming cannabis events. So we're about 30 days into our legislative session here in Washington State. It is a short session this year. I believe it only lasts 60 days. So we are almost halfway through, and there's a lot going on in that short amount of time. Among other things on the cannabis front, there's legislation to expand patient access, and there's legislation to restructure how cannabis is taxed here in Washington. There is also legislation once again to make home grow legal here in Washington State. Washington remains one of the only states with a regulated cannabis market where it is illegal to grow cannabis at home if you're a regular individual. It is actually a Class C felony here in Washington. For the first time this year, there is legislation on the Senate side of things. Usually this legislation has tried to go through the House, where it has always died in committee. I believe there has been legislation to do this every single year since I-502 passed. So that would be about 11 years now. The Cannabis Alliance is championing this effort as well. This is one of our priorities this year, as it has been in years past. On that front, the Cannabis Alliance has lobby days coming up. Tuesday, January 27th, we will be down in Olympia lobbying our legislators, telling them about our legislative priorities and what we'd like to see changed on the cannabis front here in Washington State. Also coming up on Tuesday, February 3rd and Wednesday, February 4th, the safety meeting will be happening. This is one of 2 premier business-to-business cannabis events here in Washington. Think of this as speed dating for the wholesalers and the retailers here in Washington State. So Skagit Organics participates in this every year. We'll have a table there. We'll meet with about 50 retailers over the course of 2 days. And even though we know many of these retailers, we already do business with them, we've been to these events before, the return on investment for this event is always there. If you have something like this happening in your state, I highly recommend you take advantage of it if you are a wholesaler or a retailer. So that's what I've got for you this week out of Washington State. For Cannabis Coast to Coast, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Back on the East Coast in Maryland, that state picked up a funding grant for more workforce development, and Christopher Bright has that story.
I'm Christopher Bright from The Enlightened Voice. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'll be bringing you the latest cannabis headlines from Maryland. The Maryland Department of Labor has awarded a $217,000 grant to Canna Workforce for its 2026 training programs through the EARN initiative. Canna Workforce, founded in 2023 by Dr. Kathleen Kennedy, a PhD in biotech workforce development expert, works to prepare unemployed and underemployed Marylanders for jobs in the state's growing cannabis industry. The group has partnered with Jackie Roth, founder and CEO of Cannabis MD, and the nonprofit The TPAD Foundation to deliver a specialized curriculum focused on key skills for cannabis careers. The program has achieved a strong 94% placement, successfully linking graduates to employment in the regulated industry. Dr. Kathleen Kennedy, founder and CEO, said, This earned funding enables Canna Workforce to continue training Marylanders unemployed and underemployed individuals for specific cannabis employment opportunities, and our entry-level program give workers a clear path to higher-paying roles in the expanding regulated industry. Jackie Roth, VP of Education and Strategic Partnerships, added, being part of the Canna workforce training is often life-changing. We see learners transform their career prospects, confidence, and sense of possibility. The program opens doors many never knew existed, creating pathways to economic stability and growth in the industry that values their potential. Our 94% placement rate shows the real impact on people's lives. And that's all for this week's Maryland Cannabis Report. I'm Christopher Bright from the Enlightened Voice, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the B Block, or second section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News show. We have one more to go with reports from Minnesota, Alabama, and Oklahoma. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
It's a whole new world of weed out there, isn't it? Everyone is learning new ways to titrate, ingest, consume, imbibe, and engage with this plant medicine we call cannabis. Now let me tell you my cannabis story. You know, I've had 4 major surgeries in the past 23 years and suffer from osteoarthritis with a variety of metal parts in my body and one on deck. Now, thanks to those chronic pain issues, I've been a medical patient in Massachusetts for almost 10 years now. I remember my first trip to a dispensary just outside of Boston, and I told the bud tender I didn't want to smoke it anymore. So I tried edibles, then tinctures, then vaping, and now if I'm going to smoke, I only use the Weegits filtration system. What? The Weegits.com, Weegits, that's weed, W-E-E-D, G-E-T-S.com, is where you'll find the planet's coolest product that cools the smoke from everyone's favorite flower. Now, the guy that started this was a pretty good medical device manufacturer, and he created this maze pipe that cools the smoking process from 1300 degrees Fahrenheit upon inflammation down to just 90 degrees when it reaches your mouth. That's right, 1300 down to 90. That's why this maze pipe is amazing. So here's how it works. You start with that glass bowl, you flame on, and then you inhale nice and smooth so the smoke goes through 3 different filtration and cooling systems. Now, if pre-rolls is your thing, you can use the Weegits filter that a pre-roll fits into perfectly. That's right, or even a chillum. The more filters, the smoother the draw. Best of all is the price. You can get all this, or one or the other, for just a few bucks. It'll cool your smoke and you'll give your lungs a break. Now, add in the code of PCM-TV and you get 15% off. So just go to Weegits.com and check out the best way to enjoy a cooler smoke with less coughing and hacking and more peace of mind. All that resin and tar is collected in the polyurethane filters that are easy to clean with soap, water, and a few Q-tips. Your lungs will thank you, and so will I.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the C Block, or final section of our news show for this week. I'm Alaina Pinto. There was an interesting research study released this week about the impact of THC on the frequency of cavities. That's right. If you are a regular user of cannabis, you might find that one of the benefits is a decline in teeth cavities. The International Dental Journal released the results of a study that found a chemical relationship between THC and Streptococcus mutans, the bacteria that can cause dental cavities. So after you smoke, go brush your teeth. Your breath will be better, and so will your teeth. A perfect example of this is our Oklahoma correspondent, Kimmie Cannabis.
I am Kimmie Cannabis from Can I Talk About It with your Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. We continue to see a string of enforcement action across Oklahoma as OMMA investigations result in more embargoes and emergency suspensions. On January 14th, OMMA issued emergency orders to immediately suspend the operations of Red Ox Grow and Big Chief Dispensary. These actions followed the discovery of significant regulatory violations that OMMA says posed a direct threat to public health and safety. In addition, OMMA revoked the testing laboratory license of High Res Labs Incorporated, and the enforcement actions didn't stop there. In Tulsa, an emergency order to suspend the operations of Bud Guys LLC effective immediately. An investigation found that the dispensary sold products that OMMA says posed an immediate threat, including 133 packages of medical marijuana received from and labeled by unlicensed processor. During a follow-up investigation on January 21st, OMMA identified and embargoed several pounds and medical marijuana products that were not reported in the state inventory tracking system. And even with all of the tough news lately, I'm glad to end this week with some great news. Can I Talk About It is headed to Oahu for the 9th annual Hawaii Cannabis Expo. Myself and my show sister, Ashley Nicole, will be on the ground interviewing, connecting, and sharing our love of Pakalolo. That's it from Can I Talk About It with your Oklahoma report from Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I am Kimmie Cannabis. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
Amy Carter is off this week, but there is one story out of Michigan we thought we should share. It has to do with testing labs in her state of Michigan. The House Rules Committee passed a resolution that would create a state-run cannabis reference laboratory, and that now moves on to the House floor for debate. Next up, an update in Ohio with Christina Brisson.
Hi, I'm Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Just a couple quick updates this week. The Attorney General found problems with the summary language with the revision of SB 56 that Ohioans for Cannabis Choice submitted. They're going to have to rework that language, get another 1,000 signatures, and resubmit that. But on the plus side, Columbus did receive $4.2 million of cannabis revenue. That is your brief weekly update from Ohio. I am Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations with Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
In Minnesota, the new legal market for adult use sales is slowly growing. While tribal lands continue to dominate Minnesota since they were first to open, the first sales figures have been released for adult use, and they are encouraging. Since this past September, $31 million of cannabis products have been sold legally to adults through December. In that final month of 2025, adult use sales passed medical sales for the first time, with $9.4 million for adult sales and $8.8 for the medical market. With more from Minnesota, here's Alysha Bellamy.
I'm Alysha Bellamy for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm also the founder of Herbs and Herbs, and I sit on the board of trustees for the Minnesota Cannabis College. This is your Minnesota report. 42-year-old Pine City man, Alan Maceo, has been charged with multiple felony drug-related charges after investigators determined that he was operating an illegal cultivation and dispensary operation. Maceo was charged with first-degree possession of more than 100 pounds of cannabis flower, second-degree possession of over 5,000 grams of cannabis concentrate, and second-degree possession of 50 grams of hallucinogens, and a first-degree charge of unlawful cultivating of more than 23 plants. The Office of Cannabis Management has launched a market dashboard. This dashboard has been making it easier for businesses, consumers, policymakers, and other people to see sales, licensing, and cultivation data. The Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe have made announcements related to the new tribal regulations. The interim regulations will permit Minnesota's first indoor authorized smoking consumption lounges. Tribally licensed retailers will be allowed to host designated consumption areas where customers can smoke and otherwise consume cannabis products purchased from the business. Consumption areas are located inside of businesses that are equipped with adequate ventilation so the smell of cannabis is not detected from outside. I'm Alysha Bellamy for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is your Minnesota report.
The National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, or NORML, released a survey of primary care doctors and their comfort with talking about the plant medicine with their patients. And the results are not surprising, but concerning. Researchers from the University of San Diego in California asked doctors if they were comfortable answering their patients' questions about medicinal use of cannabis, and a majority of doctors said no. Over 2/3 of physicians nationwide who are asked to offer advice on the plant medicine recognize that the plant has medicinal qualities, but admit they do not receive adequate medical training on cannabis-related issues. They do say they are okay if patients want to use the product at their own risk and encourage researching the product or talking to dispensary professionals about it. Now let's check in on Alabama with Jennifer Boozer Stewart, who continues to work on her state on reforming the existing regulations on cannabis. Here's Jen.
I'm Jennifer Boozer Stewart, reporting from Alabama for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The state of Alabama's hemp program is in shambles. We've talked a lot about the passage of HB 445 over the summer, it going into effect and immediately shuttering hundreds of businesses across the state. Well, things haven't gotten any better. The businesses who hung on and tried to make it to the January 1st effective date are now in trouble. It's been 25 days since January 1st, and no licenses for the hemp program for retailers have been given. The businesses in Alabama who were trying to hang on have now been forced to close their doors or remove hemp products altogether for 25 days. This is financially devastating, and the ABC board has no answers. One of the holdups is that each store has to have the blessing in writing of each city and county municipality that it is located in before the ABC board will even consider giving them a license. There's lots of other requirements, such as a minimum of 500 square feet for a hemp-only retailer, a minimum of 14,000 square feet for any grocery retailer who decides to carry hemp-derived drinks, and people who were selling nicotine alternatives as well as hemp products will now either have to get rid of their nicotine products altogether or add liquor in order to get a license. Representative Andy Witt, who sponsored HB 445, has been quoted many times in the press saying, if you have to reach over the beef jerky, it isn't medicine. But now, thanks to him, consumers will have to reach over the whiskey and the vodka to get their medicine. We have no idea when this will come to an end and when licenses will be issued, so stay tuned. And on Monday nights live at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, to Sweet Home Cannabama on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, X, LinkedIn, and live on FM Talk 106.5 on the Gulf Coast. I'm Jennifer Boozer Stewart, reporting from Alabama for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Every week, we check in with our stock expert, Doug Miller, on the impact of the reform movement on publicly traded stocks. This week, he continues to monitor the impact of President Trump's executive order on restarting the process for rescheduling. Here's Doug's High on Wall Street report for this week.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. President Trump signed that landmark executive order directing federal agencies to reschedule cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 under the Controlled Substance Act. That's the biggest shift in federal cannabis policy in over 50 years. This move formally acknowledges cannabis's medical value, opens the door for expanded research, and signals potential relief from the crushing federal tax burden created by IRS Code Section 280E for state legal operators. Across the states, policymakers are softening rhetoric. Colorado, a longtime leader in legal cannabis, praised the move as a tremendous and overdue step that aligns federal rules with successful state-regulated markets and may unlock billions in research and banking access. On Wall Street, one stock already reacted is Canopy Growth Corporation. Shares have climbed as investors bet the rescheduling trend will ease tax rules and attract new capital to the sector. So let's take a look at Canopy Growth stock chart. It's trading around $1.19, and it did have that initial run up on the news, and then it did pull back a little bit, but I'll tell you what, it's setting up the run. So watch for dips, trade smart, and lock in those profits. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
Now it's time to check on the plight of our indigenous friends in cannabis, and Tina Tasaka does double duty again this week with her Tribal Lands Report.
I'm Tina Tasaka, and this is the Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. As our industry continues to discuss, fight, and explore how we move ahead with the recent hemp ban, we never reported on how Indian country was impacted by the Hemp Act. Here's the breakdown. A federal hemp ban tucked into the Continuing Appropriations and Extensions Act of 2026 is set to eliminate most hemp-derived THC products nationwide. The law imposes a 0.04 milligram total THC limit per container, making nearly all Delta 8, Delta 10, and similar products non-compliant. Tribal nations were given 1 year to adjust because the ban threatens to upend native hemp and cannabis operations across the country. The ban hits regions where hemp-derived intoxicants replaced limited cannabis markets, threatening a $28 billion industry that supports 300,000 jobs. There are 574 federally recognized tribal nations in the United States. Dozens of tribes currently operate hemp, CBD, or cannabis businesses, and hundreds were exploring hemp as an economic entry point. Based on reporting and industry data, the ban meaningfully affects at least 50 to 75 tribes with indirect economic impacts on many more. Based on public reporting and known hemp cannabis activity, the most affected include Wisconsin tribes, Oneida, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, active hemp and CBD markets. States lack full recreational cannabis. Tribes in states without recreational cannabis, Utah, Texas, Kentucky, where hemp-derived THC became a primary revenue stream. Tribes with hemp-based wellness product lines now facing non-compliance under the new THC limits. What tribal nations need to do now: update codes to match new federal THC rules, shift toward regulated tribal cannabis programs, assess economic impacts, reformulate high THC products, and advocate for federally exemptions or tribal-specific pathways. That's the latest in tribal nations. I'm Tina Tasaka for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And finally this week, an interesting story about cannabis life in Hollywood for those actors who are pro-cannabis. Ted Danson hosts a podcast called Where Everybody Knows Your Name, a take off the old Cheers theme that Danson was the star on. He had pro-cannabis entrepreneurs Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey on as guests this past week. And the headline promoting that podcast caught our executive producer's eye, and that read, Woody Harrelson got kicked out of 2 bars for smoking cannabis with Matthew McConaughey's mother. Not that we keep up with Hollywood gossip, but those two are an item, admitting that they have a major crush on each other. McConaughey shared a story that when they fired up inside a bar in LA, they actually set off a fire alarm. Needless to say, it got them kicked out. However, they did not get in trouble for it. I guess that's how it works in Hollywood. Call it movie star privilege, right? That will do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Educate yourself and consume it responsibly. And don't fire up inside of a bar, okay? We'll see you next week.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Pro Cannabis Media is now WPCM-TV, your go-to website for things cannabis. WPCM-TV is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news you need.
Amy Carter. This week, she reports from inside the State House in Lansing.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis
coast to coast news, and talk shows about all things cannabis.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important.
It all started back in 2018 when Emmy award-winning talk show host Jimmy Young kicked it off with the In the Weeds podcast.
That it's not just any generic paper towel. You do have a brand that you use, right?
Yeah, we live or die by the bounty. I mean...
The quicker picker-upper! I love that!
His mission? Building an army of multimedia journalists and podcast hosts who are documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. Fast forward to today, and we've got the nation's only weekly cannabis coast-to-coast news program with Alaina Pinto.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM-TV's weekly production of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto.
Delivering the nation's only TV news-style program. Since June 2021, WPCM-TV has racked up over 1.3 million views, with 17 million impressions, and picked up over 16,000 subscribers on YouTube alone. For more information, contact the team at WPCMTV.com.